Welcome to Smash Avo Property. Today I'm speaking with George O'Brien, who's recently come back from backpacking around the world at 25. But before he left, he built a property portfolio just shy of $2 million.
But I really wanted to travel with my girlfriend as well. So this is where my story differs a little bit from most property investors, I think. So sort of had a 3-month period where I wanted to buy 2 properties, and then we planned to go traveling in April. So we wanted to do a big 6 to 9 month trip backpacking around South America and Europe. We thought we'd work hard during our younger years, and this would sort of be our reward before we come back and got stuck right into our careers.
George was also kind enough to let us delve into his numbers, fully exposing his portfolio. He talks to us about where he bought, how much for, and the amount of growth he's accumulated so far. As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with George. George O'Brien, welcome to Smash Avo Property.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I've been passed on your contact because you've got a very interesting story. So I'm pretty keen to delve into it, and we're just talking pre-podcast then, and sounds like you've got some of your numbers and your strategy and all that sort of stuff written down. So I'm pretty keen to dig in as far as you'll let us dig in today. But just to get us started, so why don't you give a little bit of background about yourself and where you're at today?
Yeah, cool. Well, a little bit of background is basically when I went to school till I was about 16. Left year 10 wanting to be a builder, get an apprenticeship and sort of do it that way. School wasn't really for me. I was quite intellectual and good at school, but it just wasn't really for me. I was more interested in sort of playing rugby league and hanging out with the girls, and I just never really sort of wanted to go to university and be an academic. I always saw myself as playing rugby league and then getting a building apprenticeship and sort of doing it that way. So sort of left at the end of year 10 and started doing a bit of building, and got offered a building apprenticeship. So instead of taking that, I thought, I'll just try my luck up in the mines. Obviously being a builder is pretty hard yakka for the rest of your life. And my father sort of said to me, hey, if you apply for a job up in the mines, you could earn quite a bit more money than being a builder, and you might be able to sort of retire early. You won't have to be on the tools for the rest of your life. So I had no mechanical or electrical background at all, no trade skills really. And I thought,
Wow.
Screw it, I'll go and apply for the apprenticeships up there. So I applied for about 8 of them, and it was pretty competitive at the time. There was about 2,000 applicants for sort of each position, and somehow I got through the aptitude test and got a couple of interviews and ended up jagging about 3 or 4 jobs out of those applications. So a couple were at underground mines, a couple were at open cut mines, and I just picked which one I felt was right for me, and sort of went with that one. And so I started that when I was 16 as a diesel mechanic. I had to choose between being an electrician and a fitter, but as being a footballer and trying to be tough, I guess I went down the mechanical road. I thought that was a bit more macho. Did that. So from 16, I was earning quite good money. I was playing football on the weekends and working in the mines during the week, and I was earning, I think in my first year, $600 a week after tax. So that was quite a good start. So from 16 to 18, basically, I was just playing footy and working up there and making really good money. But between 16 and 18, so by the time I was 18, halfway through being 18 years old, I sort of didn't have anything to my name. I'd been partying, traveling, having a really good time, and I didn't really think too much into the future or about money, retiring, wealth, property investment, any of that sort of stuff. So I was about 18 and a half, and my dad sort of said to me, look, mate, you've got nothing but a $10,000 Hilux to your name. Like you need to, you've been earning really good money for 2 years. So you need to start putting some aside and just think about buying a house. He said, I was young. I was your age once. You're still young. You got plenty of time. But if there's one thing I could advise you, it's just to put some money aside and just buy a house as soon as you can. You don't have to live in it. It probably won't cost that much to hold. Just do it. So when he said that to me, something sort of clicked in my head that I had to sort of think about the future a little bit. I still wasn't too serious about it, but I thought well, I'll give this a crack. I think in my third year, I was earning nearly $1,000 a week after tax. So it was quite good money, but I was working really hard, like doing 13-hour shifts, night shifts, weekends, traveling an hour and a half each way from Newcastle up to the mines.
Yeah.
So it was worth it. Like, I was working hard for it. So decided to put some money aside, and within a year, by the time I was sort of midway through 19, I'd saved 35, 40 grand just from pulling in the spending habits and just watching my money. I didn't really have any expenses. I was still at home, wasn't paying rent. I had to work pretty hard around the house, mowing the lawns on acreage and stuff like that, but I wasn't actually paying any rent or for my foodie or any of that sort of stuff. So it was quite easy to save that deposit in 1 year. And then I bought my first house. Did you want to go into the property journey now?
Yeah, I want to dig in a little bit as well. So I love the building thing too, because I think a lot of people who want to get into sort of that property or housing sector, I mean, the default is kind of construction, and you're so right with the hard yakka. I know. I mean, for me, like, I studied a Bachelor of Housing when I went to uni, and I kind of like always knew I wanted to be in property, but I didn't really know what. And so you sort of just you sort of, as a young guy, you sort of think, okay, what's the best way I can get the most money but still be in property, and you sort of lead towards that construction path. But I love that you went to the mines, because it's going to obviously increase your cash flow further, and it's obviously allowed you to save or have that income to save the money that you have up until this point. So I love that. And I also want to ask about your dad. Is he a property investor himself? Like, what does he do for a living?
So that's a funny story. He wasn't a property investor at the time. He sort of cottoned on to it as I did, but he was a businessman. He owns a small transport company in Newcastle, but does really, really well. He's really successful in that. But he'd always just made money out of his owner ocs, or not made money, but he'd transferred through a few owner ocs during his time. But around this stage, when I was sort of 19, we were living in Newcastle, and he'd owned a big commercial premises in Newcastle here where he ran his depot out of. Yeah. And he bought that like 20 years ago. And you can imagine how much that's worth now. A big block in the heartland of Newcastle here, in a little commercial centre. So he sort of saw what happened with that at around this time, and what was happening in Newcastle. It had been relatively flat for a while, and he advised me to get in at this time for those reasons. And he sort of saw all that happening then. So he only just started self-educating and doing that at the exact same time. But I guess the biggest catalyst for me was him saying to me, and we thought rent money was dead money, and to a degree that's true, I guess. When you're looking at buying your first home in the place that you want to live, if that's the case and you've got the deposit, then rent money is dead money. Yeah. But obviously if you're rent vesting or other scenarios, rent money certainly isn't dead money if it's working for you elsewhere. But yeah, so it was just the old school thing of buy your first house and pay it off over the next 30 years. And then you're sweet, you can retire on your super. And that was sort of his point of view at that time. And it was a blessing in disguise, really, because it was the catalyst for me actually getting into the market.
Yeah, that's incredible. So going in, I mean, you probably didn't buy a property at exactly the same time, but going into your first property, was there, like, what was going through your mind? Were you doing some research, or were you kind of just there, I'll buy a block or a piece of land near where I am, or a house near where I am? What was going through your head for the first one?
Oh, mate, I could tell you that I knew exactly what I was doing and all of the drivers, and I absolutely nailed it. But to be 100% honest, mate, I was 19 years old. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I genuinely thought I was going to be a professional footballer. Right. And if not, be a builder and sort of live that lifestyle. I'd buy my house one day and live in it with my family, and that was it. But I genuinely didn't have any idea what I was doing. I knew I had a macro, because my father is a businessman, and he knew what was happening. We knew in deep down the fundamentals of Newcastle and what was happening here, what was happening and had happened in Sydney. We had a brief, broad overview of that. But where I was looking to buy, this suburb was where actually my father's transport depot was. And it was a fairly derelict suburb on the harbour here in Newcastle that used to obviously be a working harbour. So some of the suburbs around there were quite derelict and very sort of underpriced, as opposed to the south side of Newcastle, which was blue chip sort of premium beach suburbs. So yeah, he sort of said to me, just buy something around here. And that's what I did. I had 35 grand, I think. And we found a place that was for, I think it was just over $300,000 I paid for it.
Nice.
A little block, a little 200 square block in a suburb called Wickham. And it was a miner's cottage. And it was an absolute dump. So yeah, it was very much at the bottom of the price bracket. And it was actually a funny scenario. It was an old, it wasn't your typical purchase. It was an old business friend of my dad's that he was old and he was unwell, and he wanted to just live in his house for the next couple of years or whatever he had left, but he needed the cash for it. So
yeah,
he asked my dad if he wanted to buy it. He wasn't in a position at the time, and he said, "Oh, George will buy it off you, and you can just rent it back off him." So that worked really well for me because I wanted to live with my mates. I didn't want to live in my own house and pay that big mortgage anyway, a big mortgage at the time. So yeah, we negotiated a deal, and I got it a little bit cheaper than I probably should have. So there was some instant equity there in it already, but in return, I rented it back to him quite cheap, and it just worked well that way.
Yeah.
So that's what got me kicked off. That was just a sort of private off-market sale.
That's perfect. That's a good starter one. And so, did you say you bought that at 19?
Yeah. So I was about 19 and a half. I think it was mid 2014.
And how old are you now?
I'm 25 now. Just turned 25.
Right. Okay. And do you still have it?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do.
That's awesome. So would you say that's definitely the one that's kicked off you? I mean, you've said that you already had some equity in it straight away, but do you reckon that's definitely what's kicked off this whole journey?
Oh, 100%. And to be honest, mate, it was nearly a knockdown. There wasn't a hell of a lot of equity in it. We got it at a fairly good price, but there wasn't much going on there. Luckily, he just wanted to live in it for the next couple of years. But some people would say that's a little bit, not cheating, but you get that handed to you, that nice little deal to start off with. But to be honest, mate, if I had asked 20 of my mates at 19 if they wanted to buy it, they would have said, no way, I've got 35 grand here. I'm going to buy a Maloo, I'm not going to, or I'm going to go travel, which I believe you should do all those things except buy a car. But people can say, you sort of got lucky, but it's just where opportunity meets taking action. And that's what I did. So I took that step and went from there. And looking back, I'll run you through the numbers a bit later, but it was really what got me kick-started and has allowed me to grow really quickly.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, you're spot on with, people always say that, you got given a hand, you got given money from your parents, from your grandparents, you went halves with your dad or whatever the scenario might be. But to be perfectly honest, in this day and age with housing affordability and everything else that's going on, it's not impossible to get in, but it is really hard to get in. And that's why there are government schemes and all that sort of stuff that's put in place to help people get their foot up. I was reading a statistic the other day. It was like back in the 1990s, it used to take 6 years to save for that 20% deposit. And now it takes 10 years. And if you think about that and how quickly the price of property rises, if you're constantly trying to save for a 20% deposit over a 10-year period and the price of the property just keeps going up, it's really hard to get in without having that sort of that kickoff or someone to help you out. So by no means necessary do I think that you are given a leg up. It's almost required now to get into the property ladder.
Oh yeah, if it's there, mate, you got to take it. And I'm a buyer's agent now, and I have clients that come in that have been gifted hundreds of thousands of dollars from their parents, and I'm like, how good is that? You've got an awesome start here. Let's use it and do what I did with my portfolio instead of just sitting there looking at it going, how good's this? I got 100 grand in the bank. Let's go on holidays. But and onto that as well. That's why I'm a massive believer for people getting started in. Obviously, there's the new government schemes in and all that sort of stuff. But if you have to pay LMI with a smaller deposit, pay it. Don't wait 2 or 3 years to have that 20% deposit. Just like you said, just get in when you can in the market that you can get in at a price point that's affordable to you and you can hold it. And just if you pick the right place in the right suburb and buy the right asset, it's going to work for you. Instead of waiting another 2 or 3 years, you'll miss that growth. So that's for my philosophy anyway.
Yeah, no, you're spot on there, mate. I couldn't agree more. So walk us through the numbers on the first one, or do you want to jump into the second one now?
No, I can walk you through the numbers on the first one.
All right.
Basically, Yeah, so I paid, I think, 310 for it, and had that $35,000 deposit. My dad went guarantor for me. I'm pretty sure. I don't really remember all of the details, but I had that deposit saved. Had no help at all, and then just sat on that. So I rented it back to the vendor for around, I think it was, what did I rent that back to him? And I lived across the road for a year or two.
Oh, that's handy.
And yeah. So I rented with my mates across the road for a year or so. But after a year a year after I purchased that property, I was just went for a beer with my old boy, a couple of my mates, and my dad said to me, "Oh, you've done well out of that property. I bet you're glad that I told you to buy that." And I sort of said, because at this point I knew about property, I'd heard about it, but I was still focused on footy and working in the mines and partying and traveling and having fun. But my dad said to me, "You've done quite well out of that this year." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Oh, well, have a look at what stuff's going for around that suburb." And I thought, oh, okay. So I went onto my phone and sort of had a look, and everything around me that was a similar sort of asset to what I had was going for 50 grand more than what it was when I bought mine. So that was the exact moment that the penny dropped for me, and I just become absolutely obsessed with property investing. I realized that I'd been going up to the mines every day, working my ass off, and then in the background, I'd essentially made $1,000 a week for just putting my money in the right place and buying the right.
Yeah, that's
assets.
crazy.
So
If my math's right, it's about a 16% growth. So that's pretty phenomenal.
yeah, it was crazy. So that was exactly the moment that I realized. I thought, wow, this is crazy. It can't be this easy. And I just started looking into property investing, the people, like how it works, the mechanics of it all, what the drivers are for making suburbs grow, et cetera, and studying the successful people, and realized that there was a load of people out there that are doing the exact same thing on a much larger scale, and that are quite successful. It was quite a common theme for all the successful businessmen and entrepreneurs in the world, that they had their finger in the property pie, as you know. So that was when the penny really dropped for me. And the next weekend, there was some off the plan apartments going for sale in Newcastle up on the water.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of the last beachfront block of land in the CBD, and it was the last apartment block to go up. So I went up there and just thought, I'd obviously listened to a lot of podcasts and took in a lot of information over the couple of weeks after I realized what the potential of sort of investing in property was. And I thought, oh, well, I can sort of go and buy something else. So I went up and had a look at these off the plan apartments. I didn't know to be wary of off the plan apartments at this time. But it was quite appealing to me to put down I think it was a 5% deposit, and then wait 2 years until it was built. So I went up to look at them, and there was all these apartments, and the cheapest one for me. My father always sort of said to me, buy the worst house in the best street in a suburb, all that cliche sort of stuff. And I thought, I'd love to buy another property now, and start building my portfolio. And the cheapest property up there the cheapest apartment in that block was for about 260 grand. It was a studio apartment, and it didn't have a car park. It was about 350 for a car park. So the cheapest one was a studio without a car park, 260 grand. And I had to put down that 5% deposit, and it would be built 2 years later. So I did that. We exchanged contracts, and I thought, oh, how good is this? Hopefully it's worth the same when we settle as what I bought it for. Obviously I read things that could happen and all that sort of stuff, but I wasn't really too worried about it. I was earning quite good money. I could afford to hold on to it, whatever happened. I just really wanted to start building that portfolio.
Yeah. And how old were you at that point?
So that was about a year after. So I was 20.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's pretty good. And did you use any equity from the first one?
No, because it was only a cash deposit, and I'd had another year to sort of, it wasn't costing me too much to hold that first property. And I'd had another year to sort of save the cash. And it was, I think I only had to put down 15, 20 grand for that. And then, yeah, we exchanged. So after that, I'm just trying to think, I didn't even think about that apartment for the next sort of 2 years. And then coming into 2017, I think it was. That apartment, by the time it settled in 2 years, I sort of didn't do much between when we exchanged on that and when it settled. I sort of just built my savings up and watched the Wickham house grow, and just really, like, that was when I'm becoming obsessed with property investing. So I really just started listening to a ton of podcasts, not so much reading books. I skimmed through a few books, but just studying sort of the known professionals in that area, looking into the data myself, and just really become obsessed with it. And by the time it come to settling on that apartment, it had grown from about 260 to 350 grand in value over those 2 and a bit years. So at the time when I bought it, I knew that was the last block of land sort of in the Newcastle city there that would be on the water. So basically, no matter how many studio apartments there are in the city, which there is a ton now in apartments, it would have that scarcity factor, because basically you walk out the door 5 meters to the lift, go down the lift, and then you're 50 meters and you're on the white sands of a world-class beach. Like, it's very, very hard to compete with. And that's what's obviously saw with the apartment market getting quite crowded in Newcastle. If there was a flight to quality, that would be it. At that lower price point, obviously there's much better ones with sea views and all that sort of stuff. So I sort of knew the fundamentals there of what I was getting into, and that worked well for me. So by the time it come to settling on that, I refinanced my home and cross collateralized my loan. So I didn't know what a broker was at that point. I was still young and quite naive, and thought I sort of knew what I was doing, and I was a big boy going to the banks by myself. So I refinanced. I had my first loan with just a small lender, a family friend that we knew, but I refinanced that to one of the big four and cross collateralized my loans. And I actually pulled out about 85 grand in equity to do renovations on my first house.
Okay.
And do it up. So basically, the guy that was the vendor that sold it to me and was renting it off me, he was getting moved into a nursing home. So it was time for me to dive into that and do some renovations. So I cross collateralized the loan, pulled some equity out. It cost me about 85 grand to do the renovations on that cottage. So it was a full renovation, top to bottom, absolutely everything, new kitchen, bathroom.
Wow.
So my outlay on that was getting close to 400 grand by this time. After all expenses and everything. And the apartment had only cost me sort of the 260. So at that point, by the time I moved in, after we settled on the apartment, I moved into my first house with a couple of friends and my girlfriend, and we did the big reno job. So that was we spent about 80 grand, and that was over sort of 12 to 18 months. I did everything I could by myself and with the help of my friends. And then towards the end, just got as many trades in as I can, because I was over it. But by the time I had finished that renovation, mate, it was my, what time was it then? So so I moved in at sort of the start of, I started the renovations about the mid 2017, and at the start of 2018 is actually when I moved in, when it was sort of livable with my girlfriend and my friends. They helped me pay the repayments while I was renovating. They got a pretty good deal as well. And then by the end of sort of 2018, I'd finished those renos, and obviously the apartment by this time was probably up around the $400,000 mark it was worth.
Wow.
It went through that really, really good growth period. I held it for in Newcastle, and then also the house. And by the time I'd completely renovated the house, it was close to the $800,000 mark in value. It was really a really good couple of years. I mean, it was really hard doing the renos, and obviously there was risk with sort of taking on this much debt, and I was young, and I still wanted to travel and do a lot of things, but it paid off in the end tenfold for me. So basically, where am I up to? Yeah, by the time we'd finished those renos, it was sort of the end of 2018, the start of 2019, and this is when, by this time, I was super, super interested in like property investing. I knew that I wanted to get into the industry, whether it was I'm obsessed with finance. Obviously, it's a game of finance, property investing. So I didn't know whether I wanted to become a mortgage broker, a sales agent, or a buyer's agent. But I knew that I wasn't happy in my job up the mines. I was utterly unfulfilled going up there every day. I was getting dragged down a little bit by the mentality up there, as good as the money was. So by this point, it was sort of the start of 2019, and I knew that I wanted to get into the industry, but I really wanted to travel with my girlfriend as well. So this is where my story differs a little bit from most property investors, I think. So we sat back at the end of 2018 and thought, right, we've got these two properties. Myself, I had them. My girlfriend had sort of just come on board at this stage, and we thought, we've got all this equity sitting there. What do we do? At this point, I knew exactly, knew all about mortgage brokers. I knew all about buyers agents. I knew about what markets were doing what and what was making them move and grow around Australia. But we decided that we would refinance. So I talked to a broker, a guy in Sydney. He was really, really beneficial. I'd recommend to any young investors to get the broker be the first person they speak to when it comes to sorting out your finances and your structures and all that sort of stuff. So we went and sat with him, and he advised us. He said, sort of, what do you want to do? And we said, well, we really want to travel in 2019, but we want to use this equity and buy a couple of properties while we can. So he advised us to sort of pull out as much equity as we can while we could, which in hindsight was great, because they really turned the screws throughout 2019, and we probably wouldn't have been able to do too much of that. So we pulled out as much equity as we could, which was a fair amount. I won't go into too many numbers, and sort of had a 3-month period where I wanted to buy 2 properties, and then we planned to go traveling in April. So we wanted to do a big 6 to 9 month trip backpacking around South America and Europe. We thought we'd worked hard during our younger years, and this would sort of be our reward before we come back and got stuck right into our careers. My girlfriend was going to university, and I was going to get into real estate. So we decided to do that. So we pulled all of our equity out and started looking around. I was doing all of my research, looking into the data. Obviously, we didn't want to buy in Newcastle again. I wanted to sort of diversify, and there was other markets at lower price points, like your Brizzies, your Adelaides, your Tassies, even your Perth at that time. I thought was showing green shoots. So I basically just spent a couple of months looking at where I wanted to buy and what I wanted to buy, and sort of got caught up in the whole analysis paralysis situation. And with listening to so much of the 2 big podcasts, the 2 big property podcasts, and hearing so much about buyers agents and the value that they bring. And I was on quite a good, obviously, salary at the time. I decided to engage a buyer's agent for the 3rd property. And he got me up in North Brizzy, in a suburb called Strathpine. You'd probably know all about that, near the new university going there in Petrie.
Nice.
So it was a $400,000 purchase. It was on a really large block in the medium density zoned town of sort of Strathpine, right next to the train station. And so there was, subject to council approval, obviously, there was a development potential down the track, and I really wanted that bigger block in sort of a growth area that would have that development potential down the track, instead of just a solid investment, although it was a solid investment as well. So he got me in there, and that was great. It hasn't seen too much growth since that time, but I'm happy with that. Obviously, we know what Brizzy's like, and I still think once that university's all done and dusted, and the population grows, and there's a lot more jobs growth around there, and obviously it's got all the drivers, and I still think Brizzy's got a lot left in it.
A lot of people have been saying, Brisbane's going to take off for the last 5 years. So I'm sure at one point it will. It's obviously, we've had that sort of down period over 2019. So it might just be a reflection of that, really.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the other markets that you would choose as opposed to Brizzy, some of them are quite similar. I just think that's showing the brightest prospects. And it's just due, really, but hopefully that comes to fruition. So that one was a $400,000 purchase, and the rent I'm getting there is $385 a week. So
nice.
that's not too bad at all. It doesn't cost me much to hold. So got that one, and then it was about a month before we were taking off for travels. We'd already booked a flight to South America, to Patagonia, in April. So whether we were going with the 3 properties or we bought another one was a big decision, because obviously with my first 2 being quite positive at this point, and then with the Strathpine one not costing me too much to hold, we were tossing up whether to buy another one or not, and another one come up in Brizzy, actually in Strathpine as well, except it was a much larger block, and it was a development, another development potential one, but it was a lot less yield, and it would have cost us a fair bit to hold. I can't remember the exact numbers, maybe 5 or 10 grand a year to hold.
Yeah. Okay.
And with us planning to go traveling for sort of 9 months, we didn't want to have that burden. I was coming back to realistically no job unless I went back up the mines, and my girlfriend was studying. We didn't want to have that burden of being heavily negative, even though we had that cash in offset that we could have but you obviously don't want to be paying debt with debt. That's a recipe for disaster.
No, it's good. And at least you have that buffer as well, just for security.
Yeah, exactly. So we ended up, the buyer's agent said to us, well, if you're not comfortable with that, how about we look to a different market and just do have a little cash flow play there. So we went down to northeast Tasmania, to near Devonport there, in a suburb called Burnie. So it's like a working port, and they say Devonport's sort of the land gateway to Tasmania. There's a lot of government spend and infrastructure and that sort of stuff going on down there, and the price point was still really quite low for the land content and the proximity to the water, all that sort of stuff. So we got just a 3-bedder house down there for $175,000. So it didn't cost us much outlay for a deposit, and that rents out for I think $250 a week.
Oh wow!
That's
great cash flow. What's the rental yield on that?
Do you know? Oh mate, I don't have me numbers here, but I've just got.
It seems pretty high, regardless.
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of just doing. The only reason I would do cash flow plays and buy cash flow properties normally would just be to offset a negative property. I'm not a massive fan of building a cash flow portfolio. But this one, it's the buyer's agent laid it all out for me, and obviously I did my own DD, and it seemed like it was a buzzing sort of a gentrifying area that had a lot of government spend and some stuff going on. And I just thought, at the end of the day, I can't go wrong. It's putting money in my pocket. It's not going to decrease in value. I can't imagine it'll go down from 175 grand. So we just thought, this would be good for us. We're going traveling. Let's just do it. So yeah, we did that. And that was the 4th one. And then we went traveling. So we took off just as that one settled. I quit my job and we went traveling, went to South America and Europe and did all the things. And obviously the portfolio we rolled all the loans over into interest only as well when we refinanced and bought the 2 new ones. So that was just purely because A, we were going traveling and we didn't want to have to be paying to hold it all, and B, when we come back, we're still in the acquisition phase. I'll run you through my plan later, but we still have a big plan to build more wealth and build that portfolio. So that was obviously a little cash flow play there.
I love it. I love the travel piece too. I mean, my wife and I sort of did the same thing after we bought the first one and had a bit of equity. We kind of, our property grew by 13% for the first 3 years. And once we got to that point and we knew we could buy another one straight from the equity of the first one, we kind of just decided, well, we're young. We were about 25 at the time. We're really only going to get one opportunity to go and travel, for a long period of time. So instead we decided to keep our equity there for the next one, but use our savings to go traveling. And, we probably spent 30 or 50K going all around Europe and America and all that sort of stuff. And I'm on the same page with you. I totally agree. It's an essential life experience, because it's all well and good to build a property portfolio, but you'd hate to get to the age of 60 and be a multimillionaire, but never, really traveled and experienced the world as well. I think having that perspective of, other cultures and third world countries and everything else that you really don't, like, you can see on TV and you know it's
Yeah.
bad, but until you experience it firsthand, you really don't understand how critical their situation is. So
Oh, 100%, mate. Yeah, we had that equity sitting there. We could have bought another probably 2 or 3 properties, and been quite negative and had some really good blue chip assets that would have grown for us over that year or two. But we just put that as a priority, and it was the best thing that, from a portfolio, it's the biggest mistake I've made, but I don't look at it as a mistake at all, because it just really, yeah, gave us perspective on the world and freshened us up, and now we're back into the swing of things, and yeah, best thing we've ever done.
yeah, for sure. I just want to go back and touch on the off the plan apartment purchase as well, because
Yep.
I love the fact that you brought up the whole sea view thing, and this is and the whole piece, which what you said is scarcity, because
Yeah.
what happens with off the plan apartments and why they're generally frowned upon is,
Mm.
there's a lot of supply of the same apartments in the same building. When you go to rent out the apartment, you've got all the competition of all the other apartments in the same building trying to be rented out at the same time. Same thing with when you sell. So you're kind of bounded to everyone else's, how everyone else is feeling at the same time. So if your neighbor next door in the same apartment block decides to sell their property because they're getting a divorce and they need a quick sale and they just want to get rid of it, so they take, significantly under market value, you
Yeah.
have, 2 or 3 of those scenarios, then your property is now valued at what they've decided to sell their property at. And
Yeah,
it's all
exactly.
because there's an oversupply of those apartments there. And so the reason that your apartment has done significantly well is because it has a scarcity factor of being on the water. Yeah, and that
Yeah.
itself is scarce. As you said, there was only that sort of block of land left that, that was going to have that sort of views of the ocean and be that close. So that's where the scarcity factor comes in, and there's still going to be demand for people to buy that sort of apartment because it does have those factors.
Yeah, 100%. And then even if you looked at the Airbnb upside to something like that, it's phenomenal. So yeah, I think that'll always do well in that area.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you've done really well, mate. And then I think you're spot on with the whole analysis paralysis thing too. Like once you catch that property bug and you're like, oh wow, this is really what property can do, and you go head deep into as many property resources as you can, then it's very easy to get caught up in analysis paralysis, and you always want to make, the best possible decision you can. But I think one thing that I've heard that really resonated with me is, everyone in Australia that bought a property last year has an opportunity cost apart from one person. And the one person is the person who bought the best place that's gone up in capital growth as much as possible. And everyone else apart from that has an
Yep.
opportunity cost because they didn't buy the place that they bought. So it's kind
No,
of,
I
I
couldn't
think,
agree more.
it's one of those things when, if you do feel like you're in analysis paralysis, like, do
Yeah.
your due diligence, make sure all your checks are into play. But look, if everything stacks up on paper and everything looks correct and, it's a green light, then don't be scared to go for it. If you're worried about making the wrong decision, but everything still stacks up, you could be worrying about that for this purchase and miss out, then the next, and the next, and the next. And then eventually the market's going to go out and you're going to miss out on that opportunity. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a good
And
combat
if you
to
just
analysis
take,
paralysis.
yeah, yeah. And if you just take like a macro view of the whole thing, if the fundamentals are in place, like what you're not, worst case scenario, you're not going to do too bad, like it's not going to drop in value. Obviously you get into the micro analysis once you pick that region, but if you pick the right region and the right type of asset, it's quite hard to go wrong, I think, if you know what all the fundamentals and all the drivers are. But for me, the reason I used a buyer's agent was because I couldn't be on the ground up in Brisbane, and I could do all of the figures, but that, like, I know that, like, in Newcastle here where I live, certain ends of certain streets and different little pockets of suburbs, they grow quite differently to each other. And I couldn't be up there on the ground to do all of that micro analysis. And I knew that this buyer's agent was right across that, getting all the off market stuff. So I decided to go with him, and oh mate, for the fee that I paid for him, yeah, it was well worth it, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And I'm definitely 100% a fan of that. Like for me, I take Warren Buffett's philosophy. Like, I only invest in things that I know. And if I don't know, like, I don't know about shares, I don't know about any other market apart from Melbourne and Sydney. And so if I
Yeah.
was to invest in those and diversify in those other types of assets, I would 100% outsource, because I don't have the time or the understanding of how those markets perform and what a good area is and all that sort of stuff. So I
Yeah.
think you're spot on there.
Yeah, cool.
So you've come back from holidays, and what's the, how long did you come back from holidays?
We only just got back at the end of last year in October. I think we got back.
Okay, and there's
And
no property purchases in between now and then, or is there?
no, unfortunately not. I would love to, but we we obviously, yeah, we spent a fair bit over there of our money. We travelled quite well. Like, we were backpacking, but we spent a fair bit of money over there. But now that we're back, I don't have that permanent job anymore. I've started my own company here in Newcastle as a buyer's agent to help other young people do the same as what I've done, and sort of change their lives through property. And my girlfriend's going to university. She just works at a cafe and a bar, and she's studying nursing at university. So she's got one more year to go there. And hopefully when my business picks up over the next couple of years, we'll be dinks, double income, no kids. So we'll be right to go again. But until then, mate, it's just holding off. And we've built that little base portfolio of sort of just under 2 mil. And I'm happy with that. I'm happy to sort of focus on business and other aspects of my life that will generate income. And then in a year or two, sort of go back to building that portfolio.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, everyone sort of gets to that phase in that portfolio. Like I'm at that point too now, where I'm kind of happy and content with where I am. And I think my game plan now is to just buy one every 5 years or something like that. Once my income's increasing and, I've got enough safety buffer and I've got enough equity in my property, just go again and really do my due diligence and find the best asset that I can find, and just add to the portfolio that way. I'm not going to go crazy. I mean, I could buy another 5 if I really wanted to right now, but I think just take your time and do it properly.
Yeah, there's other aspects of life as well. There's no point building this massive portfolio and being unhappy in your day job. You've got to, I'm a big fan of sacrificing to get that base early on. And so you can have that time in the market. But once you've built that base, I'm not a massive fan of just spending until you're 50 building that portfolio. Sit that to the side and focus more on your day-to-day life, or building your own business, or traveling the world, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. So looking forward, I mean, what's your game plan in the property space?
Looking forward, our plan is to have 5 mil worth of property by the time we're 30. And that's probably sounds like a big audacious goal, but I truly believe we can do it. Obviously over the next sort of 5 years, my portfolio at the moment will grow a little bit, and then I'll probably have to purchase 3 or 4 more. I think if my business can really get going and I can earn enough money there, we'll invest smart and get to that 5 mil, and that will be our base portfolio. So we'll sort of put that to the side if I can get to that by 30, and then from sort of 30 to 40, hopefully I'll be looking at some more cash flow plays and developments, maybe small developments and duplexes, townhouses, all that sort of stuff, to really produce a lot of cash flow, which will pay down that base portfolio. I'm sure you've heard this strategy before. It's used by a lot of people. So between 30 and 40, that's the plan. Really, really just get those cash flow assets and pay that debt down. And then from 40 to 50, sort of consolidate. And it's not necessarily to get a passive income. Like, everyone's got all these opinions on passive income. It works for some people and it doesn't for others. For me, it's not so much. I want to get to 100 or 200 grand a year in my pocket. It's more just having something working in the background and just knowing that in my day-to-day life and week to week, I can do whatever I want. I can start a new business. I can go and open a bar. I can go travel the world. I can, start a tech company, do whatever I want, and just know that that's working for me in the background. It just gives me that freedom. And obviously the passive income is just a bonus on top of that at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people, when they first want to become property investors, they have that dream of the passive income. Like, that's how they get sold. And it's generally because they're working a job that they don't like. And so they think that, or they see this freedom of passive income, and that's the end goal. And then they can retire and live off the passive income. But I think, I know I couldn't live 100% off the passive income that I have now, but I'm definitely at that position where I can have a think about what sort of freedom I've got now. And I think the way I look at my life now is, well, I'm not going to retire at the age of 27. Like, I may as well just be spending my days doing things that I really enjoy doing. So, you know, I really
Yeah.
enjoy what I'm doing at work currently, but what else do I want to do? And so that's what sort of triggered the podcast, and the YouTube channel is just trying to help others, you know, be successful and get themselves at least financially secure, not financially free, but just to have that flexibility to really analyze and say, okay, you know, I've only got one life. What do I really want to do every day to
Oh,
enjoy my
exactly.
life?
Yeah, and I found that I was working up the mines, earning 140 grand a year as a tradesman, and I was just so unhappy. I hated going to work every day. I was they were good guys up there, but I was dragged down by the morality of the place, and I really just wanted to get out of it. And that, like, having this base portfolio working for me, it's not even that positive. It's just compounding in the background, but it allows me to do what I want. And now I get to wake up every morning, go to the gym, have a coffee, and help other people sort of achieve the same thing. And it's just so fulfilling to be able to just really design your own life. And it sounds cheesy, but like, you wake up every morning absolutely pumped. But I truly wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't put my money in the right place early and sort of let it work for me.
Yeah, spot on. So if you were about to buy your next property as a buyer's agent, I mean, what do you kind of look for, and where would you be looking to buy the next one?
Well, it depends, I guess, on every person's situation. Some people bag the cash flow properties, and some people bag getting too negative because it taps out your borrowing capacity and all that sort of stuff. But I truly believe that every single investor is different, and obviously it depends on your income and your lifestyle and your risk profile and all that sort of stuff. But if we're looking for a growth area, it simply comes down to the supply and demand, mate. And obviously the owner occ appeal, like our mate Jack talks about. Obviously the ocean is going to have a lot to do with it as we move forward into this like technology space. But as a rule, try and stick to the capital cities if you can, or the regional hubs, and just look at all the drivers. So that, like, the population growth, the jobs growth, the infrastructure, the government spend, retail, education, all of that sort of stuff. And I'm just trying to get the biggest sort of land content I can. Once again, it depends if people on their scenarios, whether you go sort of units or houses. But especially in Newcastle here at the moment, I'm more focusing on the land content in the sort of mid and outer ring suburbs, because I believe they'll get the most growth over the long term. But yeah, basically just looking at the supply and demand, looking at all the drivers and going through the data. And I don't think it's rocket science. I think if you just look at it from a macro perspective, and look at what the data is doing, it's quite easy to pick. And then obviously you do your DD and dig a bit deeper on each property on their own merits.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about everyone's individual circumstances and risk profiles, is there anything in particular that you're implementing into your portfolio to sort of manage your risks?
Yeah, everything that I buy is, I don't plan to really ever sell anything. Obviously, you've got the opportunity costs, like point of view. If, say, the Newcastle market's done quite good, for example, and it's not going to do much for the next couple of years, you could put your money elsewhere. But everything I buy, I just wanted to make sure that it's not going to cost me A, too much to hold on to, and B, that if I do need to sell it, it's quite liquid. So they're always going to be in good markets, with lots of demand and not much supply, or a scarcity factor or something like that. But the biggest thing for me moving forward, and sort of what I've tried to do, is just keep my portfolio balanced. So for every growth asset that you buy that is quite negative, buy a cash flow one just to balance that out. And it might not be the best play long term, but in the meantime, it's going to give you that peace of mind, let you maintain your lifestyle, and just help you grow in a sustainable way, instead of getting too negative too quick, or just focusing on the cash flow, just trying to balance that out as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great. And the strategy that I'm sort of using now is, instead of buying one heavy cash flow, one heavy capital growth, I'm more focusing on the capital growth assets, and then they've obviously got a demand factor and near the city and good for travel and all that sort of stuff. So I'm Airbnb those out. So they're actually
Yeah, cool.
generating enough cash flow themselves to pay for themselves plus more. So
Yeah.
if you're in a situation where, you know, you've already bought a capital growth asset and you kind of feel like you're stuck because you've limited your borrowing capacity or whatever it may be, you know, we're in a new technology day and age, and there's plenty of other ways to sort of generate more cash flow out of it. A lot of people talk about, you know, putting an extension on, or, you know, a little unit out the back or whatever it may be. But there's so many other alternatives now to do that. So don't think that you're limited if you're maxed out at your borrowing capacity.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, everyone's scenario is different, and every little like town and city is different as well. So there's always ways around it. But yeah, I don't believe in going just people just love cash flow or just love capital growth. Like, it's just unsustainable, and it doesn't really work like that. It's a business, and you've got to manage your growth and your cash flow at the same time. Otherwise, your business stops basically.
Yeah, for sure. So you talked a little bit about some of the podcasts and things that you sort of got hooked on when you were in your kicking off your property investing journey. Is there anything that you want to share with the listeners just so they can do some research themselves?
Yeah, basically, I obviously podcasts were the biggest thing for me. So what happened is I would be driving up and back to the mine sort of 3 hours in the car each day, and I'd be listening to all these podcasts. And obviously the two big ones that come to mind was, first of all, the Smart Property Investment Show, and then the Property Couch. They were the two big ones. And what I was doing, instead of actually going and reading all like the Jan Summers books and all like Rich Dad Poor Dad and all that sort of stuff, I'd go on and sort of see what they're about and take away like the big pieces from them. So every podcast I'd listen to, I'd write down, I'd literally come away with like 10 takeaways from each podcast. And whether that's an acronym or a term to do with finance or accounting or structures or cash flow or capital growth or a data analysis podcast, I'd come away with literally like 10 points, and I'd go home that night and I'd search all those 10 points. And just, it's not enough to memorize the like the terminology and all that. You need to know it, especially obviously if you're doing what I'm doing. But and if you're going to invest for yourself, there's no point throwing around all these terms and having all these strategies and that. I think you really need to understand it. So the podcasts were a great thing to just spark my interest in, and realize, like, I would think, oh, I don't need to listen to property podcasts anymore. I'm going to go listen to Joe Rogan. He's way more exciting. But I'd go, oh, I'll turn a property one back on, and then I'd learn like 10 more new things. And I was like, this is just never ending. And still to this day, I'm learning like through your podcast, everyone's podcast. I think there's just a massive opportunity at the moment for, because even like sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago when we were a bit younger, there was just not this sort of stuff around. So there's a huge opportunity for young guys that are listening to this, that are between 18 and 25, 30, to just get on and educate yourself as much as possible, because there's just so much out there, and then obviously build your knowledge base by yourself elsewhere. But that's sort of what got me into it, the podcast.
Yeah, that's perfect. And that's the whole goal for this podcast is, number one, to try and hook that demographic 18 to 30 to say, hey, you know, here's a bunch of stories of other people who have done it that are the same age as you or a little bit older, but, you know, 2 years ahead or whatever it may be. And then sort of ignite that fire to sort of set themselves up financially. And all of the things, you know, I'll talk about anything on this podcast relating to property and my opinions and all that sort of stuff. But you know, all of these other podcasts that we talk about are so essential. And once they've got that fire and sort of listen to the stories, they can then go on and keep educating themselves. And I think we were even talking off podcasts about, you know, some of those older podcasts now, and there's so many great fundamentals in them, but sort of, you know, they've got cheat sheets of, you know, the essential episodes and all that sort of stuff. Like the Property Couch, they always say, go back down to their first episode and listen to the first 20. And that's really like their key pieces. And if you don't do anything but, you know, listen to it at 1.5 speed and listen to the first 20 episodes, you'll just get so much out of that content. And really every episode following after that sort of relays the same message in the first 20, but also has, as you say, different acronyms and different perceptions and different understandings and different takes. So it's all well and good to listen to every single one, but they kind of, you know, those fundamental key ones are really important too. I mean, I listen to every single one. I'm still listening to it now, going back and forth throughout the history. So I'm spot on. I learn something new every day, and I absolutely love it. So what gets you up in the morning? What's your favorite quote? What motivates you to be the best you can be?
Well, I'm fairly heavily into my quotes. If you've seen on my Instagram, you probably haven't, but I really do like them. I watch a lot of self development stuff every morning. A lot of motivational stuff to sort of prime me for the day and get me going. But I guess two guys that I really like are Will Smith and Joe Rogan. Obviously, quite cliche, Joe Rogan at this point, but I've been following him for a fair while, and I really believe in his views on everything, that we're not like one dimensional. We are not designed to go through life doing the same thing forever and just living the same way, working Monday to Friday, and then drinking on the weekends, and or being a footballer, or being a podcaster, or like, we're designed to adapt and do all different things. But before I go down on that tangent, probably the quote would be, all good things lay on the other side of fear. And that's from Will Smith. And I truly believe that every morning when I wake up, and if it's, I have business meetings, or I have to go to the gym, or I have to do a podcast, which I, believe it or not, was quite nervous for.
Well, you did well.
I find, thanks, mate. I find that whenever something comes up, and my instant reaction is that I'm fearful or nervous, I make myself do it. And the feeling on the other side of that is just euphoric. I can't really explain it. And at the moment, like the day that I adapted that mentality, that all great things lay on the other side of fear, I found myself just doing it without even thinking about it, and growing on the other side of that. And I've learnt so much just from taking that mentality on. I've met so many more people from just making the call, and just taking the meeting, and just putting that video on Instagram, the content, all that sort of stuff. If you're fearful of something and you just do it, and then if you keep doing that, it becomes a habit, and then you find things come to you. You don't have to go to them as much. With money, business, relationship, all that sort of stuff. I just find being in your comfort zone, it sounds quite cliche, I know, but nothing good does happen there. So every morning I get up and I have a really cold shower, do some breath work, go to the gym, and have an absolute flat out session. I do CrossFit. I wouldn't be a real CrossFitter if I didn't tell you that. So, and then I'm done by sort of 6 a.m. I've got up, I've done my breath work and my cold shower, gone to the gym, and then I'm ready for the day. And whoever calls me, whatever things that I have to do that day just seem so easy compared to doing that every morning. So
what do you do in the morning? Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I recently started getting up at 5:32 and getting up, doing like the miracle morning, which is just like a whole bunch of affirmations, scripture, reading, exercise, all that sort of stuff in an hour gap, and the rest of my day just feels phenomenal after that. And I think you're spot on. You got to challenge yourself. If you're doing the same thing every single day, that's all you're going to get is the same thing every single day. So you need to change something to make something different happen. So I think that's great advice. So
and people say to me like, if I'm at the beach at like 2 p.m, I'm going for a surf or having a tanning with my missus or something, and I put it on my story, all my friends say to me, "Oh, geez, I wish I was a buyer's agent," blah, 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 blah. But what they don't realize is I get up at 5 o'clock every day. Yeah. I do all of my personal development stuff, and then I smash out all my business stuff. I batch it and be as efficient as I can in 2-hour blocks, then have a rest, another 2-hour blocks, go for a run. And then by sort of 1 or 2 o'clock, I've gotten more than I need to get done for the day. And you have the options to go for a surf or go hang out with your friends or go for a beer, or it's and then wind down in the afternoon. But they don't see what happens in that first part of the day.
And that first part of the day is so crucial. Like your most efficient part of your day is your morning, and then everything else after that is just you feel sluggish or tired or you're ready for bed, really. So I think you're spot on there, mate. So what would be the final piece of advice you'd give to our generation to get them started?
I guess it would just be to first of all build your own knowledge base, buy it through podcasts and all that sort of stuff. But first of all, build your knowledge base to the best of your ability, if you know what I mean. You need to be working on it. You can't just lean on other people. You first of all need to know what you're getting into and know why you want to do it. As far as property goes, and once you have built that knowledge base and you feel like you're ready to sort of get the ball rolling, build a team around you. I think, and I am talking about mortgage brokers and accountants and buyer's agents and that sort of stuff, but I'm also talking about people like yourself, Jordan, and people that have been there and done that, finding mentors. And like I think you and Jack spoke about it the other day, learning from their mistakes so you don't have to make them mistakes. So build your knowledge, build your team. Don't sacrifice your happiness. Don't spend like years and years and years building this massive portfolio like we've spoke about and sacrifice your day-to-day happiness. You just don't need to do it. You can have both. And probably the last thing would be just to get started, like just get in as young as you can, just get in. And obviously if you've built your knowledge base and you're leaning on your team, if you get in early and buy the right asset at the right time in the right place, I'm living proof that it can work for you and it can change your life. You don't need to work Monday to Friday for the rest of your life in a job that you hate and then get so written off on weekends and then start again on Monday. It's true. I see it happen all the time around where I live. People just sort of wasting their lives, and it all comes down to them not knowing any better. They seriously don't know what is on the other side. They're just not informed. So people like yourself and myself getting out there and just showing people what is possible and how much you can change your life by just investing early and being smart and building your knowledge base. So I guess out of that whole spiel, just get started, just make a move, take action. And the moment you start taking action, it just starts compounding and it becomes much easier.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And just to add to that on top, as we were saying earlier, like there's other ways to get into the market too. So if you feel like it's impossible, if you're trying to save a 20% deposit and you've got nothing and you just can't see it, you can't imagine yourself saving that much money, you know, there are ways you can get started easily. You just put 10% away every week or whatever it may be. But then, as we said earlier, that you can leverage family, you can get people to help you out. There's government schemes and everything else that can help you get started. So it's not impossible, and there are other alternatives. So that's perfect, George. Well, thanks for coming on, mate.
No, thanks for having me, mate. Really enjoyed it. Hope the guys got some value out of this one.
Yeah, 100%. I think the amalgamation of all these stories really proves that there are different strategies and different ways of achieving that sort of property investment journey. So I love you sharing your story, mate. And thanks. I really appreciate you getting into some more depth of the numbers and sort of where you bought and all that sort of thing, being really transparent. So I really appreciate that, mate. I really appreciate George coming on and running us through his portfolio. He's a super motivated individual. I couldn't even do a session of CrossFit, let alone before 6 a.m. I hope you got some key takeaways from this episode because I sure did. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey. Learn from the mistakes that we have made and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing your story, you can go to jordandeyong.com/podcasts, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. Also, if you want to see what else I'm up to, you can head over to my YouTube channel to see the latest. Just type Jordan De Jong into YouTube and I should pop up somewhere. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.